past months, I've spoken about developing a spiritual practice and developing a connection with your soul life. And I looked at 3 core techniques that you can use, namely movement, such as yoga or Pilates, meditation and breathing practices, along with the practice of keeping a journal as a way of developing your spiritual life and finding a place for it in your everyday life. But of course, it's not a static process. We must be wary of a neat little wrap-up of this is how to be spiritual and this is how to have a spiritual life, and then we can go on fitting it neatly into things like when you need to go shopping. So we need to look at it a little bit closer. In today's episode, we're going to look at the idea of extending and mastering your practice of your spiritual life a little bit further, and also taking into account that it grows and changes like you do. Your soul life should be as organic as everything else about you, everything else about life. It should grow, it should develop. We always need to keep the core intact so that it doesn't just grow all over the place, but we mustn't get too stuck and too fixed in one way of doing things and one way of only finding truth. The problem is what happens when we try and look further than that is that we are surrounded by a plethora of spiritual techniques and claims and practices and ideas, and the internet has made it so easy just to find any technique, and we don't necessarily have a good way to decide what is real, what really works, what has got some authentic basis and what doesn't. Many of the techniques that you'll find there are either not based on any known or experienced knowledge, and also it's kind of like many of them have the promise of quick results, quick success, instant spirituality, changing your karma, losing your bad vibes, changing your DNA, and all these wild sorts of claims. And I also want to give you a little bit of guidance about listening to yourself and deciding what is really something that is beneficial, that is authentic, and that is kind of realistic. So obviously beware of grand claims. Anything that is a grand claim, true for every area of life, you know is not likely to be real. Listen to your heart. If you are working on developing and strengthening the core spiritual practices that we have been doing over the course of the year, and if you have been working on that, you have also strengthened your inner voice. You've learned more about listening within and listening to your heart and actually trusting your intuition that sends out a red flag, warning icon every time you find yourself attracted to either the next quick and easy fix or just the next big thing. You know, sometimes the problem with spiritual practices or following the spiritual path is that they are addictive. It's addictive, you know, at the kind of most base level because it's all about ourselves and is separate from the mundane grind of work and domestic life and all the great difficulties of living on our planet. And on the other hand, it's got the promise of something special. And so the combination of those two things can make us start following spiritual practices for their own sake, just for the sake of the kind of hit that you get, just like every other addiction. It must be borne in mind that your core practice of, you know, move, meditate and breathe is enough on its own to slowly grow your path. But it's also just a skeleton on which we can build a more challenging and rewarding daily core and avoid getting trapped by the flashy lights of the spiritual supermarket promising the next big thing. There are also techniques that we can actually develop that themselves encourage spiritual growth. They're not just about this is a spiritual technique, but they tend to be able to let you grow more. I mean, the fact is that as simple as the spiritual life can be, as simple as spiritual growth can be, the whole idea of what I've said to you is that these are practices that anyone can do at any time and that come naturally to the body and self without special methodology. At the same time, you don't want to be stuck at a beginner level, because there are many techniques which are significantly more advanced, which require more discipline and more different focus and so on. It's not just a simple thing. A good example of that is the ongoing difficulty of the mental chatter that can be used to keep ourselves a little bit complacent, or the ever fighting back mind that I've spoken about so many times this year, to tell us that the little mind in the back of the mind, no, well, this isn't so important, look, you're getting bored, there's other stuff you could be doing, there's other gems in the spiritual supermarket that are shinier than this one, that are more satisfying, that have got instant results. So the mind, as ever, is a little bit of an enemy in the process. And one of the things is it's saying this isn't enough. So to stop it going further into the spiritual supermarket, let's look at deepening some of those core techniques. First off, let's look at what kind of mental checklists should we bring to when thinking about extending our techniques, or when presented by things in the world out there which might be spiritual techniques that we can really grow our process. Firstly, step number one, always be skeptical, be suspicious, be wary, be jaded, have a good boundary. It's a very healthy attitude in this kind of new age climate that we live in of spirituality, where everything is accessible to everyone, where we can take our pickings from other cultures, you name it. So you need to be very suspicious. You can start with the principle that says there is no need for any new technique. Those given by the ancient masters remain perfectly suitable. I'm always amazed how the ancient Romans seem to have a rat race and anxiety related to it, very much exactly like our own. So, it's like the technologies change, the material things change, but the core human experience is not changing. So don't be persuaded by something that says we've changed. These are eternal truths. The spiritual self is the true self that's always been there, and the quest for consciousness and to know that is a core quest that has always been there. It doesn't change because the technologies change and the nature of the material world changes and our material knowledge and experience changes. None of those really affect the value of the soul or the essence or the core human, which essentially transcends time and space and is just all really about our consciousness. Another important point is know the source. A lot of methods purport to be from some special source, some special tradition, some special histories. Check it out for yourself. Don't just assume. We know nowadays from social media that we need to be really aware of fake news. And the simple solution to fake news is check the source. Check for the same information somewhere else. There really are simple things we can do. And we should be doing that with more of the things in our lives, especially with our spiritual lives. There it's really key, I would imagine. We don't want to mess with ourselves and waste time and incur karma, whatever might be the consequences of fake spiritual news. Things look for credibility by making claims about where they come from. Be more clear. It doesn't have to be an ancient source. It just has to be an honest source. And then you can see from there, and your intuition can see from there, is this the real thing? Be especially skeptical when the method claims to be from some transcendental source, be it from ghosts or from guides, from ancient masters or any other invisible beings. Invisible beings are great. I suppose we can never be entirely sure if they're out there, but even if we assume that they're out there, even greater. And wouldn't we like to get some news from them or some guidance as to spiritual knowledge? But the fact remains that obviously you've got no way of knowing if that really is some kind of transcendental source. It probably isn't, because we have little evidence for the usefulness of information that purports to come from transcendental sources in our world. But for me, the issue is, since we can never know whether those things are real or not, the real issue is, what would make someone who's dead or in ever transcendental situations suddenly know a whole bunch of stuff? I mean, when a human being dies, assuming we survived death, we don't suddenly become experts in everything. We just have another state of consciousness and another state of being. People who claim to be hearing things from dead people or from guides or from any of that, how do we know that that is who they say they are? There might be someone who comes along to a psychic and says, I am a great master of something, and that's very appealing. It's very overwhelming. Perhaps in their spiritual world they've got a power that can make that person really feel swamped by some kind of power. But it actually could just be some dead scully who's decided, I can make myself grand in the other world, and they would never know. Now, I'm really making up a little scenario that probably doesn't really resemble anything real, but that's exactly what my point is, that you can't know unless you can try it for yourself. So maybe we need to balance our intuition and our heart against the blind faith that comes really not out of conviction, but out of the desperate and justifiable search for knowledge and enlightenment. So still allow your skepticism to guide that search. It's also important, of course, to be aware of the very human content that you get in all the different spiritual methods. So I always think, be especially wary of those methods which disparage other methods. It's very much like religions that say we're right and everyone else is wrong. That never made sense to me, and it's also, even in terms of spiritual practice, why I think that anything that is a core human truth must arise out of the human experience and or be accessible to all human beings in the human experience. I find it hard to believe that some small group in some place in history and on earth could know the truth and everyone else doesn't, and we all somehow have to get it from them. And the same would be true for any kind of spiritual knowledge. I'm right, they're wrong is always a little bit suspicious, and much further when we say those are wrong. And then those that claim to be right, test that and be willing to throw it away. Test what I'm saying, because what I want to say has no grand claims. It simply says if you meditate, if you breathe, if you do a physical practice, you will gradually grow your consciousness. If that doesn't work for you, by all means, do find something else, but don't listen when it's saying they're all wrong and this is the only way, because that's always a little suspicious. It's like, do you believe all the advertising claims that you hear? And mostly they're generally too good to be true, and that's the best test of all. If it's too good to be, it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Good old-fashioned advice from the ancestors. And if things sound so magical that they may as well be in a Harry Potter movie, that's probably where they came from. Reality might be dull and boring, but consciousness isn't. Consciousness is our alternate reality. Not really magic in the Harry Potter sense of the word, as much as we might like to believe that. Let's talk about extending the breathing practice a little bit further. Firstly, I gave you a simple rhythmical breathing in previous episodes. 2 simple rhythmical breathing exercises I gave you. It was counting to 4 with every in-breath, holding for 4, every out-breath and holding for 4. And in another episode, also using different lengths of breathing. That's a little bit what I want to talk about today. There are many sophisticated breathing methods and breathing techniques available out there on the market, and most of them arise from the Eastern yogic methods of pranayama, and it must be said that those methods given by yogis are always given with a bit of a cautionary that it should be taught to you by someone who can monitor you and make sure that you're doing it carefully and correctly, and that also you need not to be doing any kinds of damage to yourself. There's not that much damage you could really do, because we can't hold our breath until we die, but we could make ourselves pass out or hyperventilate or feel sick and uncomfortable, or perhaps disturb some other rhythms in ourselves. So the important thing about extending the breathing methods is to understand the basic principle behind them. The basic principle is that if you want to raise your energy and your kind of psychic energies, then the inhale count should be longer than the exhale count. A lot of people say they get out of breath or they can't inhale for so long without feeling that they're going to pop. So start off with shorter. If I've said to you, inhale for 7, hold for 4 and exhale for 5, as a way of really just having the first number bigger than the small number, the last number, in order to raise your energy. Just bring those numbers down to suit you so it doesn't feel like you're inhaling for too long. The important thing in that example is that the exhale needs to be nearly half as long as the inhale. So breathing in more air and then letting it out. So the big breath is bigger, the small breath, out breath, is smaller. That increases the energy. It's not good if you have trouble breathing anyway, you have breathing issues like asthma. It's not good if you tend to suffer from anxiety. It can increase the anxiety. And if you're getting lightheaded or wanting to hyperventilate or something like that, stop immediately. Any of the negative consequences can be reversed with the opposite effect of lowering the energy. And lowering the energy is to make the out count longer than the in count. So doing it as breathing in for 4, holding for 7, breathing out for 8, or breathing in for 4, holding for 2, breathing out for 6. Any of those kind of things can be adjusted, but the basic principle is the out breath is longer than the in breath. I got a lot of emails after I spoke about breathing saying, but I couldn't hold up to 7, so I counted to 6, and is that going to be all right? And you know, it isn't about the numbers, and there's no one checking on those numbers. It's about the underlying principle. If we get too hung up on numbers and on the precisions of those numbers, we're missing the point, and we're starting to excite the monkey mind that just wants to worry about all those technical details and say to you, you see, sorry, you can't really do this. You see, it doesn't work for you. You see, it's wrong. The number doesn't work. All of those kind of things. Understand the basic principle. Find a rhythm that works for you. Learn to extend it slowly, but don't push yourself into any kind of lightheadedness. And the basic principle is breathe in longer than out to raise energy, and breathe out longer than in to lower energy and to de-stress and to reduce anxiety. It's amazing how much trouble we go to with anxiety pills and methods and courses, and you know, most available to us all has been breathing. It's always been there, and the simple act of slowing your breathing and then extending the out breath so that ideally eventually it's almost twice as long as the in breath will dramatically reduce anxiety in 1 minute. That is remarkable. It's faster than any magic pill could do, and it sounds like magic. And as I said earlier on, test the claims. Nothing special is required, no magical ancient knowledge, no magic wand, no guidance from the invisible, no special claims. It's something that everyone can try in the next 5 minutes. You know, once you've finished watching, try it and see for yourself how quickly that works. More importantly, next time you're feeling anxious or scared or just nervous, try it. Next time you're feeling sleepless, try it. It's a great method for simply relaxing yourself into greater depths of eventually sleep. So the important principle is kind of to be gentle on yourself. Don't push yourself beyond the edge. It's a subtle power that you're dealing with when you're dealing with breathing. And of course, it's not a competition. You're not trying to get somewhere. You're not trying to, last week I did 7, this week I'm going to do 8 on that count. And it's not a competition. You're not competing against other people or yourself, because the results actually aren't going to be that much better. The better results come from mastering the rhythm, knowing when to use the other rhythm, and doing it, mastering to so that it doesn't make you feel breathless or hyperventilate. So learning your own body and gradually letting your own body adapt. It's true that in the beginning you are going to feel more breathless and you are going to feel as if you're hyperventilating. Then stop, then slow down, then just change your breath. We don't want to get into some rigorous ritual that says if you put the if you put the candle in the wrong place, then the spirit shall not come. As I've said all the time, be skeptical of those kind of things. Really? Would the universe really work that way? Whether it's spirit that's in charge of the universe or nature that's in charge of the universe, or whether those are the same things, whatever it is, really, it's unlikely that it depends on the candle being perfectly placed. So be suspicious of those kind of requirements. Yes, myself or any other teacher is trying to give you a very specific and a very precise method, and therefore a known practical method that will always work. But if it seems to hang on either you get this exact thing right or you bust, it's not likely to be something that's useful for you. Again, it's true that especially with more advanced methods, you need to be carefully accurate with what you're doing. But it's not really about whether the number is correct and whether you did better than last week. Spiritual practice should be something which evolves out of us naturally, that belongs to us naturally. And but gradually learning to extend, to become more sensitive, to try and test, and to most of all, not be in any rush, because you've got your whole lifetime to do it and lots of lifetimes to boot after that one, if we're to believe the wisdom of the ancient masters. Well, next time we'll have a look at extending meditation practice and beginning to see how you can take yourself a little bit further down the road and not allow the monkey mind to get too bored. But ultimately, we're going to try and stick to the wisdom of the ancient masters, which point out to us that, you know, there are many paths and they basically all go in the same direction. The challenge comes to stick to a path, not to keep on trying new things, because then you'll know the beginning of many paths very well, but you won't really get anywhere. It doesn't really matter if your path isn't the shiniest one or the shortest one or the most famous one. In the end, as long as you stick to one path, you are going to get there. And hopefully this path, the one that is really based on you and doesn't have any special claims or special sign-ups, is the path that you'll find easiest. So we'll talk more about that in the new year. And of course, there's lots of new exciting guests lined up for the new year. And of course, there's the famous popular Year Ahead episode that will come up in the middle of January. So stay aware of all of that. Over the festive season, we're going to be rescreening a couple of favorite episodes. So if you've got any opinions about what your favorite is, let me know on the Facebook page, and hopefully that's what we're going to be screening. So a chance to catch up if you haven't already, just for a couple. I'm going to take a break occasionally. You know, after I released my book 2 weeks ago, people said to me, how could you possibly do that as well as everything else that you're doing? You know, the teaching and the astrology and the TV show. And I said, I just took the app I was busy writing for the iPhone and did that only on Saturday mornings, and then I could fit in writing a book as well. So yeah, I was also writing an app on the side, and you could, if you're into astrology, you can find out more about that on the Facebook page as well. If you're not into astrology, it's not going to make any sense to you at all. So I do need a break. And if you want to get a copy of the book yourself or give it as a gift, because it makes such a great gift at this time of the year, then head off to your favorite bookstore who have it, or ask them for it, or go online to your favorite online bookstore. You can also go to the Facebook page for this show and you'll see a link to buy it online from there. And hopefully I will see you back here next Friday at the usual time. Till then.